The night was heavy with mist, and the lanterns along the dirt road had already burned out. A young woman, carrying a basket of herbs, hurried home before the mountain silence swallowed her completely. Her heart thudded at every rustle in the tall grass, at every whisper of wind curling through the trees. And then he appeared. At first, he seemed like nothing more than a traveler. His clothes shimmered strangely in the moonlight, neither rich nor poor, but oddly alluring. His face was handsome in a way that unsettled her, as if sculpted by something not entirely human. His eyes gleamed with a playful fire, and when he spoke, his voice slid into her chest like warm wine. "You shouldn't be walking alone," he murmured, stepping closer. "The night is full of things that hunger for beauty." Her lips parted, ready to answer, but words abandoned her. A strange dizziness spread through her body. His gaze pinned her, his hand brushed against her wrist, and she felt her resistance dissolving like snow in spring. The world around them seemed to blur, the road, the trees, even the sound of cicadas. There was only him. For a fleeting moment, she leaned closer, entranced by the warmth of his nearness. But as his face dipped toward hers, she noticed something that froze her blood. The shadow he cast against the moonlight did not move as he did. It twisted, curled, and swayed like something alive, something monstrous. The stranger smiled, revealing teeth too sharp, too bright. His hand lingered on her arm a second longer, then he vanished, swallowed by the mist. When she awoke at the threshold of her own home, she was alone. Her basket lay toppled beside her, and her memory was a haze of warmth, fear, and longing. Her skin still tingled with the echo of his touch. That was the mark of a Tokkaebi. These beings were never simple demons of violence or cruelty. They were tricksters, shapeshifters, lovers of games, and often they tangled their mischievous power with the most forbidden of human desires. To encounter one was not only to risk losing one's fortune or sanity, but also one's heart, one's body, and perhaps even one's soul. Tokkaebi were never random in their pursuits. Legends whisper that they had tastes as refined and as dangerous as nobles feasting in forbidden halls. Their choice of companion was not based on beauty alone. Rather, they sought out something deeper, a weakness, a hunger, an unspoken desire lingering inside a human heart. They were drawn to the lonely, the widow who whispered her grief into the night, the young bride abandoned by her husband on the battlefield, the man who stared too long at the moon, longing for a love he would never confess. These were the ones Tokkaebi found irresistible. For in solitude, in longing, there was a crack in the human spirit, a door the spirit could slip through. A Tokkaebi might approach in the guise of a gentle traveler, a wandering scholar with a smile that promised safety. Sometimes they became a lost maiden, her beauty so fragile it begged to be protected. In every form, they mirrored the secret yearnings of the one they approached. To the grieving widow, they appeared as her husband's echo, laughing with the same tone, touching with the same tenderness. To the restless youth, they embodied temptation itself, a figure of impossible allure who offered the sweetness of forbidden pleasure. But beneath their charm was always a flicker of cruelty, like a blade hidden beneath silk. To embrace a Tokkaebi was to invite both ecstasy and ruin. Folklore describes victims who wandered through nights of passion, only to awaken in the morning drained, pale, and trembling, as though life itself had been stolen from them. Their neighbors would whisper, "The goblin has chosen them." Even more dangerous was the Tokkaebi's taste for the ambitious and the greedy. Those who sought wealth or power were ripe targets. The goblin would appear with treasures, laughter, and the promise of more, if only the human would indulge their games, their companionship, their touch. Many took the bargain, blinded by desire, only to find their fortune was nothing more than ash when dawn arrived. The stories spread warnings, but they carried fascination too. For every tale of a man ruined, there was another of a woman who swore she felt more alive after a Tokkaebi's embrace than she ever had in mortal arms. It was this duality, horror entwined with pleasure, that made their legend so enduring.
Those who surrendered to the Tokkaebi's charms often spoke of nights that blurred the boundary between dream and reality. At first, it was intoxicating. Their touch was neither cold nor warm, but something otherworldly, like fire hidden beneath velvet. Every caress seemed to carry the weight of eternity, as if one moment with the goblin was more vivid than a lifetime with a mortal lover. But such encounters were never innocent. The Tokkaebi was a creature of desire, and their intimacy carried strange consequences. Victims would often describe losing time, entire hours or nights vanishing as though swallowed by darkness. Some claimed they awoke in forests miles away from their homes, naked beneath the moonlight, their bodies marked with patterns of ash and petals, as if kissed by invisible flames. Others insisted they had wandered into a realm of endless twilight, where the Tokkaebi danced and laughed among shadows, drawing them deeper into a maze of pleasure and terror. And always there was a price. The goblin fed on the essence of longing itself, draining vitality in ways so subtle that the victim barely noticed. At first, it was nothing more than exhaustion, a faint dizziness, the feeling of having given too much of oneself. But over weeks or months, their vitality withered. Faces grew pale, lips trembled with unspoken cravings, eyes carried the shimmer of sleepless desire. It was said that the Tokkaebi did not consume flesh. They consumed yearning, the raw hunger of the human soul. Villagers told hushed tales of women who laughed to themselves as though hearing an invisible lover's whisper. Men who wandered away from their families at night, following phantom footsteps into the forest, never to return. To outsiders, it looked like madness, but to those who knew the signs, it was clear the Tokkaebi had claimed them. And yet, not every victim cursed their fate. There are accounts of women who confessed to shamans that the nights with the goblin were more than torment, they were liberation. These spirits revealed to them the secrets of desire, the unspoken pleasures that mortal society forbade. Some even believed the Tokkaebi awakened powers within them, strange dreams, visions, or the ability to foresee omens in candlelight. They whispered that once you had been touched by such a spirit, no mortal touch could compare. This duality made the Tokkaebi impossible to categorize as purely evil or benevolent. To some, they were demons who destroyed families, leaving hollow shells of once vibrant people. To others, they were forbidden lovers, guides to hidden ecstasies beyond the limits of human experience. The truth, perhaps, lay somewhere in between, in that liminal space where pleasure becomes pain and desire becomes a haunting.
One of the most chilling tales comes from an isolated mountain village where a young widow was said to have encountered the Tokkaebi on a night of crimson moonlight. Her husband had died months earlier, and grief weighed heavily on her, but loneliness was the sharper blade. According to the whispers passed down, she first saw him not as a monstrous goblin, but as a man of striking beauty, tall, with eyes like burning coals, and a smile that shimmered with mischief. The spirit appeared to her at the river's edge, where she often went to wash away her sorrow. He did not speak at first, only watched, letting the silence grow thick. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from both the earth and the sky, he said, "Why do you weep when your body is still full of fire?" She followed him that night into the trees, drawn by something beyond reason. The villagers later said she was seen wandering through the mist, barefoot, her white mourning clothes fluttering like a ghost's veil. For weeks afterward, she claimed that her dead husband visited her in secret. But the shaman of the village knew the truth. Her lover was no spirit of the dead, but a Tokkaebi wearing the mask of desire. Her body changed in subtle ways. She grew more radiant, her skin glowing as though lit from within, her lips always curved in a secret smile. Men of the village desired her, women whispered behind her back, yet none could explain the aura she carried. And then, just as suddenly, she began to fade. Her laughter grew hollow, her steps weaker. She confessed to the shaman that she could no longer tell whether she belonged to the living or the dead. For every night, the Tokkaebi called her deeper into the forest, and each morning she awoke weaker, as though part of her had been left behind in another world. This was not an isolated story. Across Korea, folktales speak of Tokkaebi appearing to those whose hearts were vulnerable, widows, lonely travelers, even monks struggling with their vows. They rarely appeared in their grotesque, horned form during these encounters. Instead, they cloaked themselves in illusions, becoming what the victim most desired. For some, that meant a lost lover returned from the grave. For others, it was an ideal of beauty so perfect it seemed divine. But always, there was a twist. The beauty was never lasting. Eventually, the mask would slip, perhaps in a reflection where the victim would glimpse a twisted shadow instead of a human face, or in a sudden shiver when the goblin's skin felt too cold, too unreal. But by then, it was already too late. The victim was ensnared, their soul tangled in the Tokkaebi's web of yearning. Legends say that some even chose to stay. They abandoned their homes, wandering into the forests and mountains, never to be seen again. Villagers would sometimes hear laughter echoing from the hills at night, laughter that was almost human, but carried an edge too sharp, too cruel. They believed it was the voices of those who had surrendered completely, now bound to the goblin's eternal revels.
The Tokkaebi was never random in his pursuits. Folklore describes him as a trickster, yes, but beneath the chaos lay a chilling consistency. He was drawn to certain kinds of people, not the strong of spirit, not those deeply anchored in faith or family, but the ones standing at the edges of their own lives. Lonely widows were among his favorite prey. Their beds were cold, their nights long, and their hearts already accustomed to whispering with the dead. For them, the Tokkaebi often came in the shape of a lost husband, his embrace warm and familiar, his voice soft with promises. These encounters filled the void of grief, but at a terrible cost. The widow's soul slowly slipped into the goblin's grasp,
until she could no longer tell whether she belonged to memory or reality. Travelers on remote roads were another choice. Men far from their homes, weary and aching, were vulnerable to visions of alluring companions waiting by the roadside inns. Stories tell of Tokkaebi appearing as captivating courtesans with eyes that shimmered like lanterns in the dark. The traveler would surrender to pleasure, only to wake by a desolate riverbank, drained of strength, his body marked with bruises that no human hand could explain. But perhaps the most haunting tales are of monks. Celibacy, discipline, prayer, all these things made them seem untouchable. Yet the Tokkaebi knew how desire works. The harder it is pressed down, the more violently it erupts when temptation arrives. Some say that Tokkaebi would appear to monks as celestial maidens, glowing with divine light, whispering not of sin, but of a higher union beyond mortal rules. To resist such a vision was near impossible. Those who yielded often vanished from their temples, their absence explained as spiritual madness, when in truth they had followed the goblin into the night. There were even tales of the Tokkaebi favoring the young and beautiful, not out of lust alone, but out of envy. In some versions, he would seduce them only to twist their beauty with subtle curses, a voice that grew hoarse, skin that lost its luster, or eyes that seemed always haunted. In others, he would keep them captive in his hidden realms, their beauty preserved like a flame behind glass, fueling his revels for eternity. Patterns emerge if one listens closely to these stories. The Tokkaebi's desires were never just physical. He hungered for the longing itself. He thrived on the ache of loneliness, the forbidden pulse of temptation, the weakness hidden behind human masks of strength. To him, seduction was not simply about bodies, it was about possession, the thrill of holding someone's secret yearning and making it dance to his tune. And so, across the centuries, people came to fear not just his grotesque face or his mischievous tricks, but his ability to look into the deepest part of a soul and uncover the longing it wanted most to hide.
In the aftermath of a Tokkaebi encounter, people were never quite the same. Folklore whispers that the goblin left no wounds visible to ordinary eyes, but the scars lay deeper, etched into flesh and soul alike. Widows who surrendered to his embrace often spoke of dreams that lingered long after they awoke. They would lie in their empty homes, shivering, yet swearing they could still feel warm breath on their necks, phantom hands sliding across their bodies. Their eyes grew hollow, as if fixed on something that no one else could see. Some withered away, lost to fever and exhaustion. Others grew obsessed, waiting night after night for their phantom lover to return until neighbors whispered that they were more ghost than woman. Travelers returned pale, weakened and disoriented. They spoke of nights that passed in a blur of intoxication, as if pleasure itself had drained them dry. Some staggered home, unable to recall the road they took. Others were found collapsed by shrines, their lips murmuring half-forgotten words, as though the goblin had replaced their tongues with something not fully human. In rare tales, they carried strange marks, bruises shaped like long fingers, or burns as if from unseen flames. These men were often shunned, for it was believed that the Tokkaebi had marked them as his property and that further misfortune would follow any household that took them in. Monks who fell to temptation rarely returned to their temples. When they did, they were no longer the solemn men of prayer. Their chants grew disrupted, trembling with feverish tones. Their eyes burned with both shame and hunger, as if one encounter had split their souls in two, half yearning for redemption, half craving the forbidden touch of the goblin again. Some abandoned their vows altogether, wandering into the wilderness. The unlucky ones were found dead, their bodies untouched by wounds, but their faces twisted in expressions of both rapture and terror. Even the young and beautiful, whom the Tokkaebi often kept closest, paid a heavy price. Legends describe how their once radiant features slowly faded, as though stolen by the goblin to prolong his own vitality. A girl known for her bright laughter might lose her voice entirely, her mouth opening soundlessly like a puppet's. A boy with clear, radiant eyes might wake one morning to find them dulled, haunted by visions no one else could perceive. Their beauty, once envied, became cursed, a reminder of the goblin's cruel possessiveness. And yet, for all the terror, one truth always lingered. Those who crossed paths with the Tokkaebi never seemed eager to speak against him. When pressed, they would falter, whisper, and even smile with a secret longing. For while the goblin's touch was ruin, it was also unforgettable, a fire that burned long after the embers turned to ash.
Not all who encountered the Tokkaebi were powerless. Folktales across Korea tell of clever men and women who turned the goblin's desires back against him. For though the creature was strong and mischievous, it was also vain, impulsive, and quick to fall victim to its own passions. One story tells of a widow who was pursued night after night by a Tokkaebi. At first, she was terrified, locking her doors and whispering prayers to ward him off. But the goblin was persistent, appearing in dreams and shadows, calling her name with a voice like silk. Finally, the woman realized that fear alone would not save her. So, she dressed herself in her finest clothes, painted her lips, and when the Tokkaebi came again, she welcomed him with a coy smile. Flattered and intoxicated by her sudden change of heart, he grew careless. While he was distracted by her embrace, the widow whispered charms taught by village shamans, binding him in his own desire. When dawn broke, the goblin vanished in a scream of smoke and fury, leaving the woman shaken but free. In other tales, monks used wit rather than strength. Knowing that Tokkaebi often targeted those struggling with inner conflict, one monk is said to have invited the spirit in, offering him wine and conversation instead of resistance. The goblin, expecting fear, found himself lulled by the monk's calm acceptance. But as they drank, the monk posed riddles, each one laced with hidden Buddhist wisdom. By the time the night ended, the Tokkaebi was ensnared in confusion, unable to escape the spirals of logic and prayer. The monk's discipline had turned temptation into a trap, and the goblin fled in frustration, never to return. Yet perhaps the most dangerous defense came from ordinary villagers who learned that flattery could both attract and undo the goblin. Women accused of being haunted by Tokkaebi sometimes laughed, praising his handsome form or gentle caress. Emboldened by vanity, the goblin would grow reckless, boasting of his power, even revealing his weaknesses. In one chilling tale, a young bride lured the Tokkaebi into admitting that he could not resist the sight of blood. That night, she pricked her own finger and smeared the doorframe red. The goblin, consumed by lust and hunger, threw himself against it, only to be trapped by protective charms hidden in the wood. His scream echoed for miles, and in the morning, nothing remained but ash. Still, these victories were rare. For every mortal who outwitted a Tokkaebi, 100 more fell victim to his charm. The stories remind us of a truth that runs through all folklore. Monsters can be resisted, but desire itself is far harder to escape.
If the Tokkaebi's lusts and temptations seemed random, the old storytellers insisted they were not. The goblin's choice of victims followed patterns, a dark reflection of human weakness, longing, and fear. Above all, the Tokkaebi loved those who lived on the edge of solitude. Widows, wanderers, and lonely travelers were said to be his favorite prey. These were the souls most likely to ache for comfort, most likely to welcome the caress of a stranger in the night. To such people, the goblin's sudden appearance, whether as a handsome man or a familiar figure, felt less like terror and more like forbidden salvation. Desire filled the emptiness, and once the heart was open, the Tokkaebi entered with ease. Yet loneliness was not the only lure. Folktales tell us the goblin had an unerring eye for vanity. Young women who admired themselves too often in mirrors, or men who boasted of their charms and strength, became irresistible targets. For the Tokkaebi delighted in turning pride into a weapon. He would arrive in a form more beautiful, more powerful, more enchanting than any mortal, forcing his victims to confront their own shallow cravings. By the time they realized they were trapped in their own reflection, it was too late. There are also whispers of the goblin's hunger for those burdened with secret desires. People bound by arranged marriages, monks who wrestled with forbidden temptations, even noble ladies who dreamed of passion but lived behind palace walls. All were said to attract him like moths to fire. The Tokkaebi was not just a seducer, he was a mirror to hidden longing. He revealed what people feared to admit, then offered it with open hands, smiling all the while. And who among us, confronted with our truest, most dangerous craving, would have the strength to resist? Legends hint, too, that the Tokkaebi's victims were not chosen only for weakness. Sometimes he pursued those of unusual purity, maidens untouched by scandal, or men of flawless reputation. To taint such innocence was said to bring him delight beyond measure. Like a shadow seeking to stain the brightest light, he hunted purity, not because it was easy, but because it was difficult. Each conquest was not just a game, but a triumph over the order of the world itself. Whether lonely, vain, repressed, or pure, the victims of the Tokkaebi all had one thing in common. They carried something unresolved within them, and the goblin, lurking in the twilight, could sense it as surely as a wolf scents blood.
The aftermath of an encounter with a Tokkaebi was rarely gentle and rarely understood by the uninitiated. Legends speak of those who survived the night, or what they believed was a night, as changed forever. Their bodies bore no open wounds, but the spirit's touch left marks invisible to the eye, a lingering heat, a shiver that ran through the spine at unexpected moments, or a faint, inexplicable scent that clung to skin and hair. Widows and lonely women often described an unsettling duality. By day, they moved among the villagers, appearing normal, their grief hidden beneath quiet smiles. But by night, however, they were haunted by the ghostly caress of the Tokkaebi, feeling his presence in bed even when they slept alone. Some awoke with strands of hair curled like fingers around their wrists, or with subtle bruises that vanished by morning. Their dreams became vivid landscapes of pleasure and danger, where the lines between reality and fantasy blurred into a hypnotic haze. Many found themselves unable to speak of what had occurred, not from shame alone, but because the experiences were beyond words, beyond ordinary comprehension. Men, too, were not spared. Travelers who fell under the goblin's charm returned from the forests or mountains altered. They were more restless, prone to sudden longings, their hearts heavy with desire that could not be satisfied by mortal women. Some became obsessed with tracking the spirit, wandering nights in search of the fleeting vision they had glimpsed once. Others fell into strange illnesses, fatigue, trembling, and visions of shadowy figures that receded whenever they were confronted. Those who ignored the changes found that their fortunes dwindled, farms failed, businesses collapsed, and even the trust of their families waned. The Tokkaebi did not strike directly, but his presence twisted the subtle threads of human life, feeding on the hidden hungers that mortals rarely admitted even to themselves. Yet the most frightening tales were those of the young and beautiful, who seemed untouched at first. Their encounters often began in pleasure, a kind of intoxicating seduction that left them breathless and yearning. But over time, the Tokkaebi's touch left a deeper imprint. Their laughter grew hollow, their smiles faintly manic, and their eyes carried a glimmer of something other, something eternal and inhuman. Families noticed a change in temperament, sudden bursts of passion, strange cravings, inexplicable attraction to the night, and a tendency to vanish for hours at a time. In some cases, the victim would leave their home entirely, drawn to the forests or mountains where the Tokkaebi lingered. Their disappearance was often framed as madness or elopement, but folklore insists the truth was far more unsettling. The goblin's embrace had claimed part of their very essence, leaving them neither wholly mortal nor fully free. And still there was a paradox. Survivors often spoke of the encounter not solely in fear, but in a strange awe. They remembered the warmth of the goblin's touch, the electric thrill of the night, and a sensation of liberation from the mundane confines of mortal existence. Pleasure and horror were intertwined, inseparable. This duality, ecstasy fused with terror, is what made the Tokkaebi unforgettable. Those who experienced him carried both the curse and the gift, forever haunted by the shadow of desire, yet irresistibly drawn to it.
The Tokkaebi's methods of seduction were as intricate as they were insidious. He did not simply approach and charm, he orchestrated encounters with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony of desire and fear. Every glance, every whispered word, every shadowed gesture was designed to awaken a secret longing, a buried craving in the heart of his chosen. For those alone in the night, he might appear as a lost traveler, offering comfort in their loneliness. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent tremors through the soul, awakening sensations long suppressed. The victims would feel inexplicably drawn toward him, compelled by a force they could neither see nor resist. The Tokkaebi seemed to know instinctively what each individual desired most: a companion, a lover, even a fantasy they had never dared admit. In many tales, he would appear differently to each person. A young woman might see a handsome man with a soft smile. A widower might witness the ghost of his late bride. A monk might encounter a radiant maiden whose gaze seemed to penetrate the deepest folds of conscience. He played with time as well. Nights stretched and warped under his influence. Hours could dissolve in what felt like moments, leaving his victims disoriented, their perception of reality unmoored. Dreams mingled with waking life, so that a simple stroll through a moonlit field could feel like a journey into another world, one where the Tokkaebi held the power to grant ecstasy or terror at will. Sometimes he introduced subtle games, small challenges that tested the will of his victims. A widow might be offered a choice: to follow him into a forest path that promised secret delights, or to resist and face a night filled with haunting whispers.
A young man might be presented with a treasure chest containing glittering riches, only to discover that his desire itself was the true prize. Each game carried both temptation and peril, blurring the line between willing surrender and manipulation. And yet, these encounters were not mere exercises in cruelty. Legends insist that the Tokkaebi sought to explore the depth of human desire, to reflect the unspoken longings each person carried. In some stories, those who survived an encounter came away with a strange wisdom, a heightened awareness of their own passions and vulnerabilities. The experience could inspire both awe and terror, leaving a permanent mark on the soul that no mortal hand could erase. Ultimately, the Tokkaebi's power lay not in brute strength, but in subtlety and insight. He understood the human heart better than any priest or scholar, and he wielded that understanding with a mischievous precision that made every meeting a dangerous, unforgettable dance of shadow, desire, and temptation.
For many who encountered the Tokkaebi, the night did not simply end with the departure of the goblin. It extended into a liminal space where dreams and reality interwove. Legends speak of visions so vivid that the survivors could scarcely distinguish waking life from the phantoms of night. A widow might awaken on her own floor, yet feel the warmth of invisible hands lingering on her skin, the echo of a voice whispering secrets she could not remember in the light of day. Travelers told of roads that twisted into forests that did not exist, of rivers that shimmered with impossible colors, and of shadows that danced with laughter only they could hear. Each night spent under the influence of a Tokkaebi became a journey of discovery and terror. Some would wander endlessly through landscapes both familiar and alien, drawn by the promise of something they could not name, a touch, a glance, a fleeting smile that vanished when pursued. In these visions, desire and fear were inseparable. The goblin would appear as both a lover and a predator, offering sensations that were exquisite yet tinged with unease. One man recalled a maiden of impossible beauty who guided him through a hall of mirrors that reflected not his appearance but his secret cravings. He reached for her only to find her form dissolve into smoke, leaving him trembling with longing and regret. Women often described similar experiences, feeling hands that were not theirs tracing along their arms, lips that whispered words their hearts secretly yearned to hear. The Tokkaebi's touch lingered like a shadow over their waking hours, a subtle torment that was impossible to shake. Some tales describe victims who became obsessed with returning to these visions, walking through the forests at night in search of the phantom touch. Others fell into madness, speaking to figures unseen, their eyes reflecting light that no mortal source could produce. Yet even in fear and disorientation, many admitted a strange pleasure, a thrill that they had never known in the ordinary world and could not abandon even when it brought them harm. Through these nocturnal encounters, the Tokkaebi revealed himself as a master of both physical and psychological seduction. He did not simply capture the body, he ensnared the mind, bending perception and emotion until the human heart became a playground for his desires. It was in these hours of twilight and dream that his legend grew, whispered by those who had seen beyond the veil and feared the lingering warmth that lingered long after the sun rose. Among the most chilling stories in Korean folklore are those of the Tokkaebi who claimed entire lives, leaving only shadows behind. These were not tales of ordinary seduction or fleeting encounters. These were legends of complete disappearance, where the victims were absorbed into the goblin's realm
their mortal existence erased or transformed forever. One famous account tells of a young bride, radiant and full of life, who was walking home under a crescent moon. The Tokkaebi appeared as a figure of impossible beauty, a man whose gaze made her pulse race and mind falter. He spoke in whispers that seemed to echo from both the earth and the sky, promising her experiences beyond mortal understanding. The bride, drawn by desire and curiosity, followed him into the shadows of the forest. Villagers later reported finding her empty home, her bedding untouched, her jewelry lying in perfect order. It was as if she had simply vanished into the night. Those who ventured in search of her claimed to see flickers of her presence among the trees, laughter that was not entirely human, glimpses of a white dress moving too swiftly to be bound by gravity, and a faint warmth on the wind that hinted at a touch she once felt. Shamans and elders explained that the Tokkaebi had claimed her entirely, taking her into a hidden realm where desire, fear, and illusion were intertwined. In that place, time moved differently. Years in the human world passed, while a single night could stretch into eternity. Another story tells of a lonely scholar, devoted to study and prayer, who was pursued by a Tokkaebi appearing as a radiant young woman. She offered him knowledge and pleasure beyond his imagination, tempting him with visions of forbidden delights. He accepted, fascinated and unable to resist, and the next morning he was gone. His manuscripts remained, but they were soaked in dew and ink blurred as though written by trembling, otherworldly hands. Shamans whispered that he had entered the Tokkaebi's world, where intellect and desire merged into an endless, intoxicating labyrinth. Those who dared follow him never returned. Even the most ordinary villagers sometimes disappeared in ways that left their families haunted. Children or simple farmers, known for their quiet lives, could vanish without a trace after a fleeting encounter, a glance, a brush of the hand, or a voice that called them by name in the night. When neighbors searched, they found only signs of passage, footprints that ended at a stone, a discarded piece of clothing fluttering in the wind, or an empty lantern swinging gently as if someone had just left. These disappearances were never violent in appearance. There was no struggle, no blood. It was as if the Tokkaebi absorbed the soul and essence of his victims, leaving only the husk of what had been. Yet folklore emphasizes a haunting detail. Those who vanished were often remembered not as dead, but as present in another way. Occasionally, villagers would hear their laughter echoing from the hills, or catch a glimpse of a familiar figure dancing in the mist. Families reported feeling warm touches or gentle whispers in the darkness, moments of intimacy that were both comforting and terrifying. The Tokkaebi's claim over them was total. They existed, but in a reality outside human comprehension, entwined forever with the spirit's games, pleasures, and whims.
The Tokkaebi's mastery of seduction extended far beyond physical allure. Legends emphasize that he understood the human heart in ways no mortal could, reading hidden fears, suppressed desires, and secret fantasies as clearly as an open book. His strategies were subtle, psychological, and terrifyingly effective. He rarely struck overtly. Instead, he observed, waited, and studied. A lonely widow would feel a sense of being watched, a quiet presence in the room, as if the shadows themselves whispered to her. A young man, obsessed with wealth, might notice mysterious treasures appearing near his path, only to realize they were accompanied by a delicate, unseen touch that drew him closer to the goblin's influence. Even monks, disciplined and secluded, were vulnerable to subtle mirages that appeared during long nights of meditation, figures of impossible beauty, laughter echoing through empty halls, voices promising forbidden knowledge or secret pleasure. The Tokkaebi's tactics relied on the power of suggestion. A glance, a fleeting touch, or a whispered word could ignite desire where it had never existed before. He played on hesitation, curiosity, and suppressed longing. A shrewd Tokkaebi might allow his victim to resist, only to create tension that made surrender irresistible. His genius lay in understanding the delicate balance between fear and attraction, to tease the human spirit, showing glimpses of ecstasy while keeping the ultimate reward just out of reach. He also manipulated time and perception. Folktales describe nights stretching endlessly, as if the world had stopped to accommodate his games. Victims might feel as though hours had passed, when in reality it was only moments, leaving them dizzy, disoriented, and profoundly attuned to every movement. Dreams were another instrument. He could invade them, creating scenarios so real that the line between sleep and waking blurred. In these dreamscapes, the Tokkaebi could fulfill hidden fantasies, heighten pleasures, and implant subtle fears, all while ensuring his victim's dependency on the encounter. Subtlety extended to the use of form. The Tokkaebi never appeared the same way twice. He became what the person most desired or feared. To a grieving woman, he might be her lost husband. To a shy scholar, a confidant who whispered encouragement and desire. To a young bride, a lover more perfect than any mortal could hope to be. Each form was carefully chosen to exploit weakness, curiosity, or longing, making resistance nearly impossible. Even those who thought themselves clever were not immune. Stories recount individuals attempting to mock, trap, or resist him, only to find their tactics anticipated and turned back upon them. A widow might prepare charms to ward him off, but he would appear through a cracked window or a reflected gaze, exploiting the smallest oversight. A monk could recite sutras to maintain focus, but even sacred words could be twisted into temptation in the shadow of the goblin's influence. The Tokkaebi's genius lay in his ability to adapt, respond, and always remain one step ahead of mortal cunning. In essence, the Tokkaebi's seduction was as much a game of the mind as it was of the body. He exploited vulnerability, magnified desire, and orchestrated encounters that left the victim both terrified and exhilarated. Those who survived, if they could be called survivors, were forever marked by a combination of fear, longing, and an unforgettable sense of intimacy that could never be replicated by human hands.
The Tokkaebi was a creature of patterns as much as of chaos, and legends say he favored certain times, places, and rituals that made his presence most potent. He thrived in liminal spaces, the edge of forests, riverbanks under a crescent moon, mountain passes cloaked in mist, places where the boundary between the mortal world and the unseen could be stretched, blurred, or broken. These locations were never chosen at random. They were places imbued with longing, fear, or solitude, where human hearts were most susceptible to enchantment. Rivers and streams were particularly significant. Villagers whispered that Tokkaebi often appeared at the water's edge, where one could hear the subtle rush of the current masking his approach. A widow washing linens, a traveler drinking from a stream, or a scholar collecting water for a ritual might find him waiting silently, his form shifting like smoke or moonlight. Water served as a reflective surface, a mirror for desire and illusion, allowing him to appear as a lost lover, a phantom of beauty, or a figure of forbidden knowledge. He could manipulate the reflection, showing a version of himself that was tailored perfectly to the victim's secret longing. Mountain paths and temple stairways were also favorite hunting grounds. Legends describe Tokkaebi appearing to monks and pilgrims climbing steep trails at twilight. The wind would carry faint whispers, shadows would dance unnaturally, and figures that seemed human would vanish when approached. Those who followed these apparitions often found themselves in strange clearings where time moved differently and the air thrummed with a sense of expectation. The Tokkaebi could emerge from fog or shadow, inviting trust and desire in the same breath, making the victim question both the path and their own senses. Rituals, too, played a part in his seduction. Shamans spoke of nights when people performed offerings to spirits, calling on ancestors for guidance or protection. It was during these nights that Tokkaebi often struck, exploiting heightened emotional states. A flickering candle, the scent of incense, or the rhythm of drumming could awaken hidden desires, creating a perfect stage for his games. He could twist ritual energy subtly, bending it to amplify longing or fear, making his victims vulnerable to both physical and psychological seduction. Even in homes, the Tokkaebi's methods were meticulous. A widow's bedchamber, a scholar's study, or a young bride's room could become arenas for his subtle intrusion. He appeared through windows, in reflections, or even in dreams that overlapped waking reality. His presence was never violent outright. Instead, it was layered, drawing the human spirit into fascination and submission. The choice of place, time, and circumstance made each encounter unique, tailored to exploit every nuance of desire and hesitation. Through these patterns, the Tokkaebi demonstrated not only cunning, but artistry. His world was one of shadows, moonlight, and whispers, and his prey were those whose hearts were most malleable. By manipulating place, ritual, and timing, he ensured that even the cleverest, strongest, or most disciplined could fall into his web, drawn by both fear and fascination. These stories, passed down through generations, created a map of his haunting, a world where desire and danger converged under the watchful eyes of a master trickster.
The psychological impact of encountering a Tokkaebi was profound, often lingering long after the physical presence of the goblin had vanished. Folktales insist that those who survived the night, whether they had been seduced, tempted, or merely glimpsed the creature, were forever altered. Desire, fear, and fascination combined to leave marks on the psyche that no mortal healing could erase. Widows and lonely women often carried a duality within them, a heightened sensitivity to longing and a lingering dread. They would go about daily life with a strange awareness, feeling shadows where none existed, and hearing whispers only they could perceive. Dreams were never merely dreams, they became a continuation of the encounter, unfolding nightly in ways that mimicked, extended, or even improved upon the experience. Over time, many of these women developed an obsession with recalling every detail, writing in journals, or performing small private rituals to summon the memory or glimpse the Tokkaebi again. Their emotional lives became a delicate balance of pleasure and terror, as if the goblin's influence had fused with their very soul. Men were similarly affected, though often in different ways. Travelers, scholars, and monks who had been touched by the Tokkaebi found themselves restless and introspective. Desire and temptation became constant companions, manifesting in unexpected ways. Compulsive wandering, fascination with shadows, or a fixation on women and experiences they could not fully comprehend or pursue in the ordinary world. The mind itself became a stage where the goblin's games continued, with fear and longing interwoven so seamlessly that distinguishing reality from hallucination became increasingly difficult. Some men became withdrawn, others dangerously bold, attempting to recapture the thrill or confront the figure that had haunted them. Even those who were young, beautiful, or seemingly pure were not spared. Their behavior often shifted subtly at first,
a lingering gaze, a nervous smile, a fascination with moonlit landscapes. Gradually, these signs grew into more pronounced changes: unusual restlessness at night, fascination with secret places, or a compulsion to repeat rituals linked to their encounter. In some cases, families reported that these individuals became different, more intense, more alluring, and simultaneously more fragile, as if the goblin's influence had fused with their very soul. Psychologists in modern retellings might describe this as trauma or obsession, but folklore presents it differently, as a permanent intertwining of human desire with something beyond mortal comprehension. Survivors carried the mark of the Tokkaebi, not in scars or injuries, but in heightened awareness of longing itself. They became attuned to subtleties in human interaction, sensitive to unspoken desires, and acutely aware of the thin boundary between pleasure and peril. The most haunting aspect is the duality. Fear and fascination existed side by side. Those who had encountered the goblin often described an irresistible pull, a sense that part of their soul still resided in the shadowed realms where the Tokkaebi lingered. Even years later, they could feel the memory of a touch, the echo of a voice, or the heat of a phantom embrace, compelling them to remember, reflect, and sometimes seek the impossible reunion. In essence, the Tokkaebi's influence was eternal. It was not merely a moment of terror or ecstasy, but a transformation, a permanent reshaping of the human mind, where desire, fear, and fascination were inextricably bound. Those who survived carried both a curse and a revelation that the human heart is a landscape as easily manipulated as any forest or river, and that desire, once touched by the goblin, could never be forgotten.
In the final tapestry of Tokkaebi's influence, all threads, desire, fear, illusion, and longing converge. His interactions with humans were never simple. Each encounter was a delicate dance, a game of shadows where every word, every gesture, every fleeting glance carried weight beyond the ordinary. With the lonely and the grieving, he offered warmth and attention that mortals could no longer provide, wrapping them in a comforting yet dangerous embrace. To the vain and the curious, he presented perfection, an impossible reflection of beauty and desire that mirrored their own secret cravings. For those burdened by restraint or secrecy, the Tokkaebi became both temptation and release, drawing out what was hidden and making it undeniable. And for the pure or disciplined, his appearances were tests, subtle challenges that revealed the fragility of perfection in the face of desire. The psychological and mystical layers of his seduction were inseparable. He manipulated perception, bending time and space, interweaving dreams with reality until his victims could not discern where one ended and the other began. Desire became a labyrinth, and he was the unseen architect, leading each soul through passages of ecstasy, fear, and revelation. Those who survived were never unchanged. They carried the Tokkaebi's mark in subtle tremors of the mind, lingering warmth of phantom touches, and a fascination with the night that would not fade. Yet there was a paradox to his presence. The Tokkaebi was both predator and muse, danger and fascination. In tales that survived through generations, people who encountered him often spoke of terror mingled with longing, horror laced with curiosity. Pleasure and fear intertwined so deeply that they could not recall one without the other. And in that duality lay the essence of the goblin, a being who could seduce the body, enthrall the mind, and ensnare the soul, all with the same whisper, glance, or shadowed smile. In the end, the Tokkaebi's world is one of infinite possibility, where desire is both a path and a trap, where the human heart is the ultimate stage
for a performance of seduction, illusion, and revelation. Those who crossed into his domain, whether for a fleeting moment or in eternity, were forever changed, carrying with them a story of longing, fear, and unforgettable intimacy. And though they may walk again among mortals, part of their essence remains suspended in the twilight, where the Tokkaebi waits, ever patient, ever watchful, ready to awaken the desires that linger just beneath the surface of the human heart.